After 1 year at university, in order to improve my love life, I changed my bed linen.
Please, team. Wow. Now, just to be clear, do you mean you were using a certain type of bed linen that you were regularly washing, but then changed it for a different type? Or do you just mean you had never washed that same bed linen?
No, I got a different style of bed linen, and it's concerning the noises of horror that came from an audience who believed that it was possible.
So what was the bad luck sheets, let's call them?
I think it was a standard green duvet cover from John Lewis.
What is the problem with that?
Thanks, Dad.
I mean...
So where did you go, first of all, for this new bed linen?
I retrieved an old duvet from my childhood home.
And that had on it...
Thomas the Tank Engine. And the pillowcase did actually have the full ensemble cast on it.
Right, well, here we go, then. Who were the full ensemble cast?
Well, don't you worry. You've got James there, you've got Gordon there, you've got Percy there, you've got Toby the Tram, and, of course, grinning at the back, you've got the Fat Controller.
Do you know what, Ivan? I believe you.
Thank you, Sinitta.
I think when you're at uni, right...
There's so much pity in your voice.
No, but I do feel sorry for you, but I get it.
When you went home to get your childhood bedspread...
Yes.
It would be right to assume that that was from a single bed, because you were a young lad and you had a...
Yes.
Is that not a bit of a challenge as well, the fact that you're inviting a lady and you've got a small single bed?
Oh, I had a single bed at college, didn't stop me.
You're a little fella.
I mean, it was quite the squeeze at times. I rather enjoyed it.
Did you ever christen
Did Thomas ever see
Tank?
Action?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more delicate to say, were there ever any passengers in Thomas's train?
There were never any passengers
with
Thomas, but in third year, Fireman Sam put out a lot of fires.
All right. So what are we thinking then? Sinitta, what do you reckon?
I still believe him.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and well done.
Now you're being patronised as well.
No, I think it's possible, this, because I think he might have thought it might be a conversation starter.
I thought it was a conversation starter. I wasn't in any of the conversations.
Yes. True.
You're saying it's true. Ivo, was it true or was it a lie?
It was, I'm afraid to say, true.